thank all of you for coming out, because I know there are a lot of things that you could do. I understand that you can find places where you can even buy rings that are based on the one that Kate wore when she hooked up with William. And I know there are all kinds of diversions that are available to you, so I appreciate the fact that you decided to come in and participate in this discussion. We've been talking about the summer project, and we're talking about beyond the summer project of 1964 and now. I'd like to first of all just say something about 1964 summer project that was the basis of what it is that we're trying to do now, so that people might at least have that as some kind of background. In 1964, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was one of the primary organizers of the summer project. And one of the reasons for the summer project in Mississippi was that we had run into a wall of opposition from white reaction in the South, just trying to register to join the Democratic Party. Wasn't like people were trying to join the Uhuru movement. We're not followers of Gaddafi. And I want to place that in context, you know, because right now Gaddafi, the Uhurus and things like that are the enemy, but we have run into a wall throughout the South and in this country generally, just trying to register to join the Democratic Party, which was not a revolutionary organization at all, by any circumstances. And white people had become bored with the struggle, seeing Africans beaten up on television, etc. The media had lost its interest in the question. And the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and particularly one young activist, his name was Bob Moses, came up with the notion of a summer project. And the summer project would be something where the objective was to win thousands, at least 1,000 students mostly, but people to come from throughout the country to come into Mississippi. And with the assumption, especially, that if white students came into Mississippi, the media would follow them. Their parents would be concerned, the white world would be concerned, the white-owned and controlled corporate media would be concerned, and they would come and bring some attention to the struggle that we were still engaged in just for the right to join the Democratic Party. And 3,000 people came out to that summer project called Freedom Summer in Mississippi. And many of them were white students that came from everywhere, from throughout the country. And on the first day of the summer project, 3 civil rights workers disappeared. Schwerner, Goodman, who were both white North Americans, and an African whose name was Cheney. And it was clear from the very beginning when they disappeared that they were dead. Anybody who had any experience in the civil rights movement knew that they were dead. And of course they were dead. And this massive search started to try to locate them. People were dragging rivers and digging holes in places where bodies might be hidden. And for a long time, they didn't find Schwerner, Goodman, or Schwerner, but every time they dug a hole almost, they were digging up black people who had been murdered in Mississippi. That's how treacherous, how difficult the situation was at that time. And so, again, the objective was to get people in, and what they had planned to do had worked out an agreement with the liberals who were connected to the Democratic Party of the United States, that they would, that the Mississippi Freedom Summer Project would organize African people in Mississippi into the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, would go throughout Mississippi and actually organize people to come to register to be a part of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and to even have a convention that was open to anybody. And then go to Atlantic City, New Jersey, where the National Democratic Party Convention was being held, and to challenge the National Democratic, the Mississippi Lynch Mob Democratic Organization for its credentials, the right to represent the people in Mississippi, with the assumption that since the Mississippi Democratic Party violated the Constitution of the United States and violated even most of the principles of the Democratic Party, that with this demonstration from the African community that had come together, then the liberals and the Democratic Party would seat them instead of the lynch mob. And what happened, of course, some of you are familiar with it, had incredible organizers, people using all kinds of methods, got to Atlantic City, New Jersey, had Fannie Lou Hamer appeared before the Credentials Committee of that convention, was making her presentation, and Lyndon Baines Johnson, who is now enshrined as the liberal president from Texas, Malcolm X didn't think he was that liberal. In fact, he said that the only difference in a Texas cracker and a Mississippi cracker is a Texas cracker spoke with a Texas accent and a Mississippi cracker spoke with a Mississippi accent. But the point is that Johnson became concerned because he was fearful that if he seated the Africans from Mississippi, that he would lose the white vote in the South. And so he called a press conference at the very same time that Fannie Lou Hamer was speaking, to divert the press attention, media attention from Fannie Lou Hamer and onto himself, so that people who were being affected by this very powerful presentation by Fannie Lou Hamer would miss it. And that was one of the things he did. And then he called Hubert Humphrey, who wanted to be on the ticket for vice president, and who was also one of the enshrined liberals in this country, and told him to go and deal with these Africans, to let them know that there was nowhere in hell he was not going to seat the white Mississippi Democrats, and that at best what they could get is two non-voting seats. And then Humphreys got the other great liberal, Walter Mondale, who Jesse Jackson was telling us to vote for in the 1980s, who helped to carry this out with the assistance of people like Martin Luther King, etc., to calm these black people down so that the white Democratic Party could be seated. And of course, when the liberals offered this to Fannie Lou Hamer, her statement was that we didn't come this far for no 2 seats when everybody is tired. And what happened was the Africans walked out of that convention, and that led to a split in this country between the liberal sectors of the white population and the black movement itself, leading to 1964. The same year, 1964, the Atlanta Project happened in Atlanta, Georgia, revolving around the campaign of Julian Bond running for the Georgia legislature, and he won, and then they wouldn't seat him. And he was a member of SNCC too. So he won something like 2 or 3 times before he was seated, and they wouldn't seat him because of his position on the Vietnam War. 2 years later, of course, the Black Power movement exploded, and which further deepened the movement of African people towards self-determination and struggle for power, as opposed to trying to be included into the Democratic Party. But I want to just say that the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, as much as people in the United States, really love to have this kind of parochial view, this assumption that things happen in the United States separate and apart from what's happening in the rest of the world, that there is a context for the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. There's a context even for the Civil Rights Movement. Some people don't particularly appreciate the discussions that we have because it's not sugar-coated, and it's not BS. It's not an attempt to say what people like, but trying to bring some kind of science to the discussion so that we can get to real solutions, so that we can understand what the hell is going on. And it's because that particular white America is so accustomed to people saying what you want to hear that the truth falls, very hard, like on your ears and sensibilities. And that's why, it was incredible to most of the white world that something like 9/11 could happen. It was incredible. How in the hell would somebody want to do this? But the rest of the world suffers from America. The whole world, any place there's suffering and misery on earth, the people are suffering from America. So for us, it wasn't surprising at all. And for most of the people in the world, it was not surprising. We have to have this discussion so that you won't be surprised by 9/11s and things like this, and also that we can build a genuine movement for liberation that will join with this trajectory that the people on the planet Earth are involved in now to free themselves from the kind of relationship that America has imposed and Europe has imposed on them forever. That's what this discussion is about. So when we talk about America and our relationship to America, when we talk about the condition of African people, we don't talk about it as though we got a problem because white people don't like us, fight against racism, take a course to unlearn racism and everything is going to be well. That's nonsense. That's crazy. That's senseless, you know. Because the reality is, before white people knew who the hell I was, you know, people were coming to the continent of Africa and kidnapping me, picking me up and bringing me here, you know, and working us. This is an objective relationship that we have. It is based on a material condition. Something happened in the world, and there exist in the world certain kinds of relationships that we can understand. We can explain, we can fight and overturn. That's what the discussion is about. That's what it's about. So we talk about the whole civil rights movement and things that were going on in the world. What was happening in the 1960s? Well, in that general period of 1960s, we can open it up, if you will, with the situation that happened with what people refer to as World War II. We call it the Second Imperialist World War. A war to redivide the world. And as a consequence of this war, a number of things happened, but one of the important things that happened was that the U.S. came out of that war as the most powerful country in the world. More powerful than England, where previously, prior to that war, up until that war, England alone controlled something like a quarter of the world's population. England alone controlled a quarter of the world's territory. England did, by itself. That little rock, you know, off Europe controlled that much of the planet Earth. It controlled Nigeria. It controlled, you know, various other places around the world. England by itself. And that doesn't say what Portugal controlled. It doesn't say anything about what the Germans controlled and other European powers controlled. So with the Second Imperialist War, what we saw was that the United States came out as the most powerful country in the world. The international monetary system was moved from England to the United States during that period of time. This is objective truth. You don't have to believe what Omali said. Go to the library right here at the university. You will see that's how it unfolded. And what that meant was that now the U.S. has access to what were previously colonies solely in control by Europe. Europeans control these colonies almost by themselves. Now the U.S. is getting the raw materials because it came out of that as more powerful than anything in Europe. And so now the U.S. is also in Nigeria. The U.S. is also in India, previously controlled solely by England. The U.S. is in Cameroon. The U.S. is in all of these places around the world, and it has the productive capacity of the United States is blown up. It has a greater capacity for production than it's had since the advent of slavery, since it stole the land and territory from the people who are now in concentration camps that they call reservations. So now all of this resources is coming to the United States. And then the problem becomes, how then can the United States transform these raw materials into finished products? When you have, in this country, you have two capitalist modes, means of production. That would be called, one of them being labor intensive, that's in the South. And that's what Africans were the ones who engaged in the most labor intensive production, picking the cotton, building the rail lines, clearing the swamps, you know, doing all of that nasty work from can't see in the morning to can't see at night. Objective truth. And then in the North, you had capital intensive production. But now they need to have, with all these new raw materials, they need to open up factories. They need more factories in the South. And they need more laborers who can leave the South and come to the factories that exist in the North. It used to be a time when they would get their labor from Eastern Europe. But now Eastern Europe is part of the Soviet bloc, so they can't get labor from Eastern Europe. So they got to get them from black people down south. But they can't do that because the relations of production prohibit black people from even being able first of all, if there were a factory in the South, to work in it, and secondly, to leave the South easily and go to the North, because the lynch mob in the South would prohibit that. People had to actually escape from the South, sneak out, they'd leave here because they required black labor, black uneducated labor primarily, to work in the fields to produce the production in the South. And this is where you see the liberals come forward. This is what began to define what liberalism was in this country. These were forces who recognized that for Africans to be able to work in the factories either in the South or to leave the South and go to the North, they had to have social mobility. And to function that means they had to be able to leave the South and go. They need to have freedom to do that. They had to have the ability to be educated enough to work in the factories, because you don't need any education to pick cotton and dig ditches and things like that. So a minimum amount of education was required. And so you had liberals who stepped up and said, we need, standing up for the rights of black people to have education, black people to have rights of social mobility and things like that. I know doesn't sound right. Because we think that happened because Martin Luther King made a good speech. That's why it happened. Martin Luther King made a good speech, and that's why it happened. Nonsense. There was a material basis for it. Yes. There was a material basis for the rise of Martin Luther King as the spokesperson for this movement that happened as it did. There was a material basis for it, and what you saw then was a united force, a coalition between the liberal sector of the white ruling class in this country and the liberal sector of the African middle class or petty bourgeoisie. This is the forces that had some connections with the white ruling class. The workers didn't have any connection with the ruling class. And this is why the civil rights movement expressed itself as philosophically nonviolent. Because this movement was funded by the liberal sector of the white ruling class, and they were not about to fund a movement that would allow somebody to even purchase a rock, a Saturday night special. It had to require philosophical commitment to nonviolence. It had to. Yes. And it did. And so you had this social movement, and King became the representative of this movement. Said, well, no. Said King was for nonviolence because he was a Christian and he read Gandhi, which is kind of contradictory, but but the Ku Klux Klan was a Christian organization. And their Christianity told them to kill black people, and King's Christianity told us to get killed happily. Nor does any of this explain why the people who sold us the book on Gandhi, who wrote the books about Gandhi, why they weren't pacifists, or as Malcolm called them, masochists. So it seemed like this pacifism only worked for us. You see? But that was because it had to be a non-violent movement to solve a problem that the bourgeoisie, the ruling class in this country had. And that was to have a revolution from above that wouldn't go too far. But of course you can't do stuff like that, because once you turn it loose, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. You don't know Fannie Lou Hamer is waiting in the bush. You don't know that the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee is going to rise up. You don't know that people who you put into motion is a part of the process of changing the world, will themselves become changed and will want more than what you want. They want more than just to satisfy some requirements of the ruling class, right? Come on. For production. That's what happened. At the same time, what you had was during the same general period. You're talking about the Second Imperialist War. You had, because of the preoccupation with European imperialist powers, with each other, fighting against each other, the kind of political space that allowed for revolutionary movements for national liberation to be happening all around the world, because it wasn't just happening in Mississippi, it was happening everywhere. It was happening in South Africa, and we saw that in 1947, you saw first the struggle that led to the emancipation, or at least the former independence of India. 1949, China became free. In the 1950s, you saw a revolution sweeping the earth. Cuba became free in 1959. 1960s, Vietnam, and struggle sweeping South America and every place else in the world. It wasn't just happening here. Freedom Summer was happening every damn where in the world for a period of time. And we were a part of it.
this need to have us, Africans in this country, be separate from the greater reality that was happening in America, to be separated from this greater reality. Because the vision of America is this noble place that never had colonies. You know, that made mistakes. Yes, we made mistakes. But they always mistakes. There's a certain kind of, what's that movie, that white guy who was kind of dumb, at Forrest Gump, you know? A certain kind of political Forrest Gumpism, you know, that happened in this country. It's just clumsily stumbling through the world and just falling into wealth everywhere, but it's not because of any plot on our side. We didn't try to do it, you know? Yeah. And so, but revolutionary transformation was happening in the world. It was happening here too. And the reason it was happening here too is because we are a part of a colonial oppressed people, you know, experiencing the same kind of contradictions, notwithstanding what is now said about who we're supposed to be. Notwithstanding the existence of Barack Hussein Obama. So the U.S. became this primary imperialist country. And the whole world was in a state of transformation and transition. And the Mississippi Summer Project came down in that way. So it moved from this place. When it moved from this place of simply trying to integrate into the Democratic Party. Then in 1965, the SNCC, organized in Lowndes County, Alabama, created the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. And the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, they moved from the Democratic Party, said, okay, we're going to have our own black political party, Lowndes County, Alabama. And not only did they say we'll have our own black political party, but they said that we will defend ourselves, that we're not playing this turn the other cheek anymore. That we will defend ourselves with arms if we are attacked, because we're human too, right? And so the Lowndes County, they made the symbol of the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, they made it something that would inspire courage and strength, etc. And they opposed it to the symbol of the Alabama Democratic Party. The symbol of the Alabama Democratic Party was a white rooster. Isn't that so? And the symbol of so SNCC made the symbol of the Lowndes County Freedom Organization a Black Panther. That's where and the media referred to it as the Black Panther Party. When we had a SNCC office here in St. Petersburg on 22nd Street, across the street from this thing that they call the Manhattan Casino now, it had on the top of the wall was the Black Panther. That was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that preceded what people came to know as the Black Panther Party that came out of Oakland, California, but it's a part of the same historical trajectory. And then, of course, what happened was that as this movement sought and achieved its own identity, its own mission, separate and apart from what the liberals wanted, separate and different from the NAACP or the African middle class that has assumed all the characteristics and peculiarities of the dominant, you know, power, social power in this country. When this movement had actually defeated imperialism ideologically, and defeated U.S. imperialism ideologically and politically, had turned its back on the U.S., had created its own independent organizations. The Panthers was just one of the biggest, better known of them. But there were all kinds of organizations throughout this country. Jomo was one of them. And you know, there were black rights fighters down in Fort Myers. And the Black Raiders over in Tennessee, all kinds of organizations popped up that in Houston, Texas, People's Party #2. And what the United States government did was set out on a mission of assassination and mass arrest.
Yes.
That murdered Carl Hampton, before you know about Fred Hampton, but Carl Hampton, who was assassinated in Houston, Texas. Fred Hampton, who was murdered in 1969 alone. More than 300 members of the Black Panther Party was arrested in mass arrests throughout this country. More than 30 members of the Black Panther Party were killed by police in this country. In the 1960s, you saw the assassination of Malcolm X. You saw the assassination of Martin Luther King. And we're supposed to assume that, oops, accidents, you know, just happened. But the government, having lost its ideological and political supremacy in the African community resorted to a military attack on this community. And people were killed all over the place. That's when we saw heroin first come into our communities. That was the first drug, heroin. After the movement had been destroyed, heroin then comes into the community. And then, of course, where was the heroin coming from? It was coming from what they call the Golden Triangle, where the United States was involved in fighting a war against the courageous people of Vietnam who wanted to be free and control their own resources. And so this is where most of the opium was coming from at that time. And now the opium suddenly finds its way into our communities. From Vietnam, from the so-called Golden Triangle, now we're dealing with first the opium heroin addiction in St. Petersburg, Florida. That was in the 1960s. And then, of course, before they were completely out of Vietnam, before the Vietnamese had them leaping on those helicopters off of those skyscrapers trying to get out of Vietnam before the National Revolutionary Front got there, the movement had begun to emerge in South America in a serious way. Yes. 1979, we saw July 1979, we saw the Sandinistas march into Managua in Nicaragua, kicked out this old Uncle Tom Somoza, who had been put in power by the United States government that trained this military and kept him in power. And then, of course, the U.S. turned its attention there, and Ronald Reagan and the rest of them waged the most brutal kind of warfare against the people of Nicaragua. They killed, maimed, bombed people, and also initiated a situation where now African people suddenly lose our taste for heroin and decide that we want to go on a cocaine trip. And where does most of the world's cocaine coming from? South America, where the U.S. is involved in a war against the people there. It's going to kill two birds with one stone. Kill the people, the revolution there. And this is testimony that has been put forward. It's been in the various committees have researched this, and then of course the guy whose picture was up there, I can't remember his name now, Gary Webb, wrote a whole book on this stuff about how the United States government, the CIA, created crack cocaine. Yes. And the one who they called the biggest pusher, Ricky, what's his name? Highway Ricky Ross, who had never seen cocaine, until the CIA introduced it to him. And then they didn't just have cocaine. They created something in a laboratory. They tell us that African young people can't learn math, right? Yeah. But now we're supposed to believe that high school dropouts living in the housing projects have created factories that they can transform cocaine into this other thing that they call crack. And so it's sweeping our situation. Our whole population addicted to crack cocaine. Damn near everybody on crack. And they imposed on our communities a drug economy. Yes. So that if the rent got paid, it had something to do with the rent, with the drugs. If the phone bill was paid, it had to do with drugs. People who thought they were beating the man, getting over by selling drugs, didn't understand that Uncle Sam was the pusher man. The White House was the rock house, and Uncle Sam was the pusher man. They thought they were getting over. They were simply carrying out a franchise that was run by the federal government and various of its agencies. This is what they imposed on our communities, right? And so people were being assassinated, a movement being attacked, and all of a sudden, we lose our taste for revolutionary transformation. And now we have Jerry-curled characters who run around supposedly representing the freedom of our people, professors and stuff, the question of the liberation of our people becoming academic questions, and high school students get an opportunity to read this book and that book by Professor three-piece suit wearing, please. And this was a part of the assault, like on the African Revolution. So now, a generation or more later, a whole population never heard of the revolution. A whole population that heard of it and was scared of it, was glad it was gone, right? Are now having to face a discussion that is unsettling. But it's not my discussion. It's a discussion that's happening everywhere in the world. Everybody's talking about this.
Talk about it.
And if we are going to move forward, we have to recognize that the vast majority of the people are terribly upset upset about the arrangement that has been imposed on us. Nobody. You got half the world living off less than $2 US dollars a day. No, nobody is living and saying that their children should suffer the misery that we suffer so that white people can go to the mall safely. That's ridiculous. And this notion that somehow genius was somehow dropped in the white world and everybody else is poor and ignorant and facing violence because somehow we are less civilized and don't have other kinds of moral resources that white people have. That is nonsense, and you should be offended by that. You should be offended that somebody is running this country. You should be offended by people who are trying to separate you from the rest of humanity. So that you find yourself huddling all the time in fear, scared of the black man in the dark, scared of what the Arabs are going to do over here, scared of this, scared of every damn thing because you've been separated from everybody else. You should see that imperialism and white power is your enemy just as it is my enemy. It's your enemy. Because the white ruling class is not loyal to any damn body. It doesn't love anybody. And you see something like this man Barack Obama, is that his name? Barack Obama, Barry, just gave something like $13 trillion to the damn banks. And you worried about your 401 and everything else that's happening to you. That's white power that's doing it to your ass. Don't be scared of some poor, impoverished person who's living in misery in the housing projects in this country. You've chosen the wrong damn enemy. You've chosen the wrong enemy. We said get on the right side of history. Because there is no way to stop this train. And the enemy is imperialism. And everybody who stands up and tries to protect imperialism will meet the fate of imperialism. Because the people will be free.
Keeping chairman's message and chairman from traveling all over the world and Africans all over the world from hearing chairman speak, from hearing that message? Resources.